Good afternoon, everybody. Just give you a very quick update and then take questions. As you will have seen, that the legislation for charging groups of returnees to retrieve some of the costs for their stay in managed isolation facilities passed all stages last night and this morning, so that is now in place. It's an important step to ensure that those people who need to come home can do so without worrying about being charged. And the system we will regulate on is fair and balanced and will contribute to the sustainability of the managed isolation and quarantine system by helping to manage the flow of incoming people over the border and into our facilities, and it will also recoup part of the costs of running the system. The bit that I just want to give a little bit more detail on is the waivers that people can apply for once the regulations come into force, which would probably be around mid-August. Anyone can apply for a waiver once they know they're going to be travelling to New Zealand after those regulations come into force. The regulations are currently being finalised, but it is expected those people requesting a waiver would need to make a declaration and provide information to satisfy the Chief Executive of MB that they meet the conditions for a waiver. And that would either be on undue financial hardship or that there are other special circumstances. The CE can then grant a full or partial waiver of the fees. Waivers are, of course, an important mechanism to assist anyone experiencing undue financial hardship or other special circumstances such as compassionate reasons. The assessment would need to take into consideration the individual circumstances and be consistent with decisions made in relation to other applicants. The CE's decision can be challenged or judicially reviewed, and waivers can be granted for up to the time the payment is due. The bill will also allow regulations to set the timing and manner of payment of charges. It allows unpaid debts to be recovered through the courts if necessary. And we intend for the regulations to allow for payments by instalment at the discretion of MB in cases of financial hardship. But we'll have more to say on this as the regulations are approved. So I'll now hand over to Air Commodore Webb and we'll take some questions after that.
Thanks, Minister. As of today, we've seen 35,096 people return to New Zealand and go through our facilities since the 26th of March. Current capacity is provided by 31 managed isolation and quarantine facilities across 5 regions. Allowing for room turnaround and contingency, we have space for around 6,392 people, and we expect to have 5,859 people in managed isolation in 7 days' time. I want to update you on work we've been doing to review the security measures at our facilities. I've talked previously about immediate measures we took following absconding. This included improving where necessary fencing and having on-site police presence in every facility 24/7. On top of this, we've now completed a site security assessment across all of our 31 facilities. While we already have robust security measures in place, this process identified some actions that would further strengthen these measures. We have 28 licensed site security managers now in place at our facilities. These are senior security staff who have a responsibility specifically for security at each site, including implementing any further improvements identified through the assessment done. They're also responsible for ensuring delivery of induction and training to incoming security staff. We have developed an induction program which is being rolled out across all facilities over the next week. We're also in the process of introducing further technological measures such as CCTV, door alarms and motion detection systems where required. The combination of additional trained staff and technology gives us a strengthened layered approach. I do want to say again that these facilities are not prisons. Our job is to make sure people understand the rules in managed isolation and to have systems in place to make sure it's difficult for people to break those rules. However, individuals need to be accountable for their behaviour, and their 14-day stay in managed isolation is their contribution that they need to make to protect the gains we've made as a country. I just want to touch on the exemption process. We're seeing a lot of exemption requests come in, but I want to ensure people understand that we are only approving exemptions in very limited situations. I see every application, and I understand the very difficult situations some people are facing. but protecting New Zealand from COVID is the basis that we make every decision on. This means that the majority are declined, and it's important that people realise that 14 days in our facilities is our key line of defence, and that they think through this before embarking on a journey home. Finally, we're working on a dedicated website to support those planning to come home to New Zealand, as well as support those staying in managed isolation. This will ensure people have the information they need to plan the managed isolation part of their return. We're also standing up a contact centre which can take phone and email queries from the public, and this will be launched alongside the website in the next fortnight. I want to close by thanking 35,000 people who have passed through managed isolation without incident and for the part they've played in keeping our country safe. Minister.
Thank you. Questions?
Minister, the opposition has been critical about how much money you're going to make from the charging system for managed isolation. Are you concerned that the waiver scheme could bring in even less, and how are you going to make it fair?
The waiver scheme, as we've outlined it, was exactly that we modelled the scheme on that we announced when we said we were bringing the legislation. The fact of the matter is that if we are going to have a regime that doesn't breach the Bill of Rights, that we have to have the ability to waive fees for people experiencing financial hardship. We cannot economically ration New Zealanders' ability to return home. What we have said is that we do want to put in place a regime so that if people are going on, leaving the country, like for example, if I decide to go on a holiday and factor in 2 weeks of managed isolation, that I will pay for that isolation at the end of it. But I think where we've got to actually strikes a balance of fairness and one that is workable, and one that, importantly for me, ensures the sustainability and stability of our managed isolation facilities, because these are the most important line of defence that we have in keeping New Zealand COVID free.
And can you guarantee to New Zealanders that the charging system that you put in place will stay that way and they won't be expected to pay more or less in the future?
Oh, look, the charging system that we're putting in place uses the secondary legislative tool of regulations to bring in cohorts. We do not have any plans to bring in any further cohorts at this stage, but I can't give a cast iron guarantee of what this will look like in 12 or 24 months' time if we're still in these circumstances. The legislation is future-proofing us because we simply do not know how long we're going to be in this situation. We do not know how long we will be requiring everybody entering our country to spend 14 days in managed isolation or quarantine before they're essentially allowed through the border. I don't think any of us in January, when we look back, imagined this is what we'd be talking about in August.
What kind of contracts are you hiring people on if you don't really know how long you'll need them for?
What was the question in relation to, sorry?
You're saying you don't know how long this will be. So if you're hiring someone to run a managed isolation facility, are you hiring them for 6 months on a rolling basis? What's the kind of time frame?
Well, the people running our managed isolation facility have ongoing employment. They're employed by the New Zealand Defence Force that they have been seconded over to take on this task.
At some level.
There's hotel staff that are there, but in terms of the operational leads who are running the managed isolation facility, there is a NZDF staff member, senior staff member, who is in charge of the facility. Once they finish doing this, I imagine they'll go back to their defence job, but I'll let Air Commodore Webb comment more on that.
No, you're quite right, and that's the system we have in place.
Look, on the day 3 tests, obviously with day 12 test, there's a big deterrent to refusing the test, which is you don't get to leave. Is there any deterrent to refusing the day 3 test?
Well, I'd say the system as a whole has a range of stepping stones from day 3 through to day 12. Day 3 is a really crucial first indicator of likelihood, and of course it's probably a relation question that the health would have a better detail to answer upon. But we certainly encourage people to take the day 3 test as a key part of that process. I don't have detail to describe or to assume that that's not the case, and we're having a good uptake in people understanding the need to take it, and therefore that flows through to day 12 and then the release once the low risk indicators are met.
No tool at this point, to your knowledge, to encourage the day-free test, because it is illegal to force them to do it. And
That's right.
you're already keeping them till day 14.
That's right.
And this very issue is an issue that Commodore Webb and I have been discussing with Health this week, in the week before, in terms of what kind of uptake we do have around that day 3 test, and making sure that we are monitoring that. But as you rightly identify, the tool to ensure, the one that gives New Zealanders the most certainty that our managed isolation facilities are providing that strong line of defence, is the fact that everybody has to have a negative day 12 COVID test returned before they're released. If they refuse that test, then there is the ability to insist on longer quarantine periods.
Keeping them in kind of more stringent isolation, maybe not allowing exercise or anywhere where they might get anywhere close to other people if they refuse that day-free test, essentially treating them as if they already have COVID if they're going to refuse it.
Look, what we're working with Health is to actually assess how big a problem this is, before we'd start imagining any measures such as that.
Thousands of people going through, it's going to happen occasionally,
Oh,
right?
what we are working with our health colleagues is to actually do a bit of an assessment of the problem before we start rushing to what the solutions would be. That we will work through a range of measures. What we see is that our managed isolation and quarantine facilities have to be the subject of continuous improvement. There is no rule book for this. We've never quarantined 30,000 people at our borders like this before in hotels. So we're continuously improving.
Speaking about rule books, I mean, is there a protocol or a book for how these facilities are run? We've spoken to a guard at a facility who says every time a new defence crew come through, they sort of chop and change how things are operating. You know, whether people get to different groups get to mingle in the exercise area and stuff like that. Is there a specific book of how these places should run?
Yeah, I certainly would not describe it as chop and changing. In fact, what I would describe it as continual improvement. And so what we've, as I've just described earlier on, we've just conducted the site assessment survey for our facilities. You know, we don't go back far when we stood these things up, and we were rapidly building our capacity. We were ensuring that we were maintaining safety and doing things as well as we possibly could. But all the way along, we've emphasised the point that continual improvement is a cornerstone of making things safe. That security review identified a range of things which we've implemented immediately and also have plans to into the future. What I can tell you is we absolutely have procedures in place on every facility to support people to do their job. One of my action item points was to review the efficacy of those procedures, and we have undertaken a teamed approach to ensure that they are going to be improved upon even further. We're working with Health to implement a combined health and security procedure which we want to roll out certainly before we transition fully into the full MB structure. But in the meantime, what we have ensured is everybody knows what the procedures are and they're trained. They are completely aware of what's required of them on any given day.
Is it principles or procedures?
Well, both.
It sounds like you're developing a protocol right now, and therefore there isn't one strictly.
There are absolutely some fundamental principles which will remain the same regardless of the facility they're in, such as physical separation, for example. But let's not forget that every single facility is in fact quite different. We've visited about 9, I think it is now, and it's clear that that the physical layout of each facility has a bearing on how things are done. So, so that has an influence on the localised procedures, which, of course, will change potentially between each location.
So you're saying that every new crew that comes in and makes decisions are making better decisions than the last lot, for instance, and they're not changing aspects of how the place is run markedly?
I'm really confident with the supervision from a central perspective and how things are improved. Like I say, there are procedures in place to ensure the foundation aspects are consistent. Each location will build upon and improve on what's known and what's gone on in the past. We've identified procedures as something that needs to be improved further. We are implementing that change as we speak. I'm expecting to see the enhanced early version of SOPs rolling out in the near term, and then the fully implemented version integrated with Health within the month.
So there's lots of discussion about not if a second wave will occur, but when. Do you think that we might see a second wave this year?
Look, I mean, everything that we are doing through our managed isolation facilities is to mitigate the risk of that happening. I think we've seen today quite a lot of discussion from health experts around that, and I think they're better placed to talk about that. What we can talk about is what we're doing inside managed isolation and quarantine facilities to mitigate the risk of that happening, and that is the continuous improvement that Air Commodore Webb is discussing, and that does need to be site-specific. It is making sure that we are continually evolving this as we do see issues come up. One of the areas where we know that we've seen vulnerabilities in other places, such as Victoria, is with those who work in managed isolation. The fact that they're not residential, they do go home. So we've been putting a lot of effort over the last 2 to 3 weeks with working with those people who work in our hotels, with their unions who represent them, around what the kinds of procedures we have to put in place, both to give that further certainty and security to those people, the cleaners and the cooks and the people delivering the food, as well as the NZDF police and health and security staff in our facilities, what security they need in terms of testing regimes, in terms of making sure that there is good disease control happening within the facility in terms of physical distancing, appropriate PPE, and that we're making sure that that is in place. One of the things, whenever we visit a facility, we make it a point to talk to as many of the workers within the hotel, within the facilities and hotels themselves, to ask them how safe they're feeling and whether they feel they have the adequate safeguards, access to testing, all those kinds of things. So it is something we're actively mitigating the risk on. But I'm going to ask Air Commodore Webb to talk about this. The reason he was brought in to do this job and asked by the Prime Minister to do this job was not because of expertise in running hotels, but actually was managing risk. So,
yeah, risk management is every decision that happens inside a facility is founded in risk. And it comes back to some of the points about security assessments, and it also comes back to the point about how we manage our people. Are they confined into their room for 14 days, or in fact, is it logical and reasonable to expect us to have a fair way of managing them with some space outside their room? And we feel we've struck that balance about right. We're constantly weighing up, of course, the impacts on what happens when people leave these facilities and the ongoing care that they may need from a mental health perspective. We are reviewing the infection prevention control measures that we do have in place, from the visible PPE use through to physical separation. Some of the reviews that we've recently undertaken for the site assessment survey has considered such things as whether some of the exercising regimes are appropriate, whether the cleaning regimes within elevators, etc., are appropriate. We're always looking to enhance that, and so far, again, as we've seen, over 35,000 of people have come through, and we've contained this to a realistic rate of COVID positive cases from those who have come in from overseas have been contained inside these facilities.
Your expertise in managing risk, though, do you expect that we may see a second wave within the community this year?
I think that's a question probably for the Director General of Health. All I'm saying is our job is to make sure that the operations inside those facilities are as safe as they possibly can be, and I feel we're doing a good job of that.
Commodore, you mentioned that a lot of people have been rejected for exemptions. Could you give us an idea of what kind of requests you're rejecting and why?
Yeah, last week we had 148 requests for exempted travel, and the reason I wanted to make the point was a lot of people are looking to whether they should travel home to New Zealand and whether it's realistic to expect them to be able to go out into the community and grieve and attend things like funerals and tangis with their loved ones. And I want to make the point early on that it's highly unlikely that they'll be allowed to do that inside the 14-day period. That is simply doesn't match up with our expectation and our assessment of the public health risk that goes with that. So I'd rather people knew that early on and then think through either managing their expectations about when they travel, that's part of their travel timeline, or whether indeed they choose to travel or not.
Is it mainly like medical exemptions?
Yeah, so there are medical exemptions, and we see a range of medical exemptions come through. The ones that we typically see approved are things like transit exemptions, so those people who are coming through New Zealand on the way somewhere else. And we're seeing quite a large number of unaccompanied minors coming into New Zealand and then needing to be met and joined by a parent or caregiver. Those for exceptional circumstances, which typically were called compassionate cases, are very low. Somewhere between 10 and 15% will be approved.
Commodore, do you think that we could upscale the number of quarantine facilities? We've got 31 at the moment. Sir John Key made some comments this morning saying that he would expect that, perhaps we could expand that number. How realistic is that in your experience?
I mean, the short answer is unrealistic right now. Those decisions are founded, again, I think as I've said in the past, against the set health criteria. It is a three-pillared approach between the suitable facilities, the healthcare staff, and those wraparound, I'll call it security staff as well. So we have scoured the country to assess locations that are fit for purpose against that. I think I might have said in the past, we looked at over 60 facilities in Auckland early on, and we chose only about a quarter of those. So right now, when we're measuring it against our existing risk appetite, to meet those requirements, there are very few remaining.
I'll just add to that I can understand there is an appetite for people to kind of expand the opportunities that bringing more people over the border brings. But we have to make sure that managed isolation and quarantine is just that, managed. This is not there because we want people to go and spend 14 days before they enter New Zealand. It's there because it simply has to happen if we're going to retain New Zealand's status of not having community transmission of COVID. We have to ensure these are the strongest line of defence that they can be. What we are also doing as a government, though, is looking at whether there are opportunities beyond the managed isolation and quarantine facilities that we need for returning New Zealand citizens, if there are other alternatives that might be for economic opportunities in the future. What opportunities lie out there in terms of what those facilities might look like. And that is an ongoing program of work for the government that we've indicated.
What does that mean, other opportunities, other facilities, what kind of...
Well, if we take the example of Queenstown and why we needed to rule out Queenstown, which would seem to most people on the surface is a great place to put managed isolation and quarantine facilities there. There's a large number of large hotels. So if you looked at the criteria of having large hotels and a density of hotels, which would make sense in terms of setting up the regional infrastructure to run managed isolation, that would get a tick box. What it didn't have, however, was the health support that sat alongside that in terms of the primary health that would need to sit alongside that, some of the mental health, even access to things like GPs. There is a 10-person hospital that is at Queenstown. There'd have to be transfers to Dunedin Hospital if the worst happened. Does that mean there could be more bespoke options further down the track with different cohorts of people? That is something we are open to, but that is a program of work that will take time to progress.
Several guards are said to have fallen asleep while on the job. What has your review revealed about this issue and how widespread has it been? Should guards be paid more considering the importance of this work?
Look, I'll give a very brief answer to this and then I'll ask you, Commodore Webb, to comment on this, because this is something that we are aware of. 7 instances of reports of guards falling asleep on the job. It is something that we do take seriously. The security guards inside our hotels are an important line of defence. Obviously a layered approach with police and NZDF as well. All the instances that have been reported have been investigated and have been part of the site security assessments that Air Commodore Webb referred to. In terms of should they be paid more, you would have heard Air Commodore Webb talk about the fact that there's, I think, 28 senior people who are all licensed security providers have been appointed to facilities. So this is about a program of work to make sure that we do have the appropriate skills, and with the appropriate skills often comes constant pay rates, but I'll hand over to you.
I think you've covered most of it in detail, Melissa, but it's a system we're running. It is supported by humans, and we've made the point that there's going to be human factor issues at play. What I would say is it's unacceptable. Investigations in each case have been implemented. Part of the changes we've applied with this assessment and application of additional senior staff is in response to this. So training, culture setting, induction, realising the expectations that's placed on this. This is serious business, and we want to make sure that people are fully aware of those expectations. We have a layered system, so I'd want to reinforce to people that just because one person may fall asleep does not signal that these places are unsafe or insecure. There are multiple layers associated with technology and additional staff, and so we will take those necessary steps to ensure that things are improved further.
And actually, we had a really good example yesterday of the 3 layers of the security working to stop an attempted
That's right.
breach.
That's right. We had somebody who decided it was time to leave, and they were struggling with their short period in isolation and tried to get out, try to walk out the front door. It was a security guard member who intervened and stopped this person leaving quite quickly, able to bring on board police and NZDF staff. This person was handcuffed, taken back to their room, given a strong verbal warning, and were made in no uncertain terms what the consequences would be if that followed. So I think this is an example of where those security guards, the training that's benefiting them really stood out.
Are you looking at implementing better mental health support at these facilities, given the fact that the person who was sentenced the other day, they showed signs of distress? Are you looking at perhaps having more support there so that it doesn't get to that point?
This is something that we are continuously discussing with health, that what we do have when everybody enters a facility, that they are given a health check, and that does need to also be their mental well-being as well as their physical well-being. It's not just a case of taking the temperature. The welcome pack that returnees are now given when they enter a managed isolation facility does give them information about how to engage with various mental health providers, because we recognise that a lot of the people returning home are returning home because life has got pretty difficult where they were and have been trying to get home for a period of time now, or they could be coming home because of a set of circumstances which are distressing, to the sickness or death or dying of a loved one is one of the other reasons people return home. So we're continuing to work with health to ensure that there is good mental health provision within the managed isolation facilities.
So off back of that, with the legislation that's passed, you said about special circumstances for a waiver. Other than financial hardship, could that include the likes of a dying relative, and that's the reason they...
Yes, and we've spoken about that. So that could be a dying or very sick relative.
Just beyond a discussion when somebody enters the building and access to mental health resources, which I presume you mean phone numbers and the like. I mean, what is actually on the ground for if someone is in distress? Has anything meaningfully been put in place for that?
There have been some instances with particular individuals where quite intense wraparound support have been put around some individual cases. I'm not obviously going to get into specifics of those where they are noted. I mean, obviously there is all the caveats of the fact that someone is in managed isolation and all of the safety requirements of that need to be managed as well. But this is something that we continue to work with health on, that it is important. What we're seeing probably is more and more instances of people who do require more and more help entering the facilities. I think that's probably been quite a change from when this started out in March, for example.
What is continuing to work with? Like, are you looking to do anything tangible, or like what's happening in these discussions? Oh,
well, obviously health are the providers of this. This is not something that managed isolation should rightly be in charge of. This is a question for health. They should be making sure that the best health provision is being put in place with there. So this is something that we continue to talk with health about what the appropriate levels of support are and what some of the flags that we should be looking for people who might need more intensive wraparound services, and how it is that we might identify them. It is something that health, and I know that both the Minister and the Director General are acutely aware of, and their teams are as well, and are looking, as we see the movement to the DHBs having the lead responsibility in each of the regions for the provision of health services into the managed isolation facilities, that mental wellbeing and health is a key criteria that needs to be assessed there.
Just on this case, this woman, she was showing quite clear distress before the escape attempt, or the escape, I mean, was there any services involved in this case before she displayed this distress? Was it apparent prior to,
I'm not going to get into discussing what health provision was given in an individual case.
What's the expectation around staff wearing PPE or face masks? All staff, not just security.
Yeah. The key point is that we will conform with the Ministry of Health guidelines on when and how to wear PPE. So that's probably the foundation point that I just want to emphasise up front. In practical terms, it is whenever we're interacting with returnees. So from the life cycle of that ecosystem, it is from when we are arriving into the facilities, their facilitation into their rooms, if we're supporting them during exercising or smoking periods, and then on their exit. For drivers of vehicles like bus drivers, there's very clearly laid out guidelines on when and how to wear their PPE. For a bus driver, for example, we will keep the 2 seats behind that bus driver clear, because this is again an NZTA and a Ministry of Transport inject into the scenario where actually they don't want to have their bus drivers wearing face masks while they're trying to interact with the traffic. So for example, we will ensure that it's appropriate, it's worn where it's appropriate. The point I would make is, again, it comes back to that continual improvement. If someone's not wearing their PPE face mask appropriately, we will deliver training to make sure it's on properly. I wouldn't expect somebody to have it on their chin and then put it on their face and then put it back on their chin. I would, I guess, point out that they are highly conscious of being under an acute media spotlight, and despite the fact that they're clear on when and how to wear their PPE, sometimes they decide in those situations that they would want to put it on, even though they're in a low risk zone and there's actually no need to have it worn. So people are clear on where to wear it, and we are continuing to reinforce that.
Do you have an expectation of your Defence Force staff that are in the same room as guests wearing face masks, for example? Should they be wearing face masks?
If they're interacting with inside a 2 metre bubble facilitating, then yes.
We're getting reports that that's not happening in some facilities. What's your response to that?
Well, I'll take feedback on that, and I'll certainly investigate it. If that's the case, we'll make necessary changes.
So on guests mingling, from a day 1 guest being in the same room as someone at day 14, is that appropriate?
Physical separation is the key foundation stone here. So we have enforced and ensured that that is the case, and that is the key risk.
And from those 2 time frames, could it be 2 metres? Is it 5 metres apart? Is that the situation?
I mean, a close contact definition is actually far different than what most people think. If you see a photo of someone walking past somebody, that is not a close contact. Inside 2 metres for an additional 15 minutes is a close contact definition. So that is what we're ensuring is not taking place.
Minister, in terms of the COVID Tracer app, Rob Fyfe has criticised it, saying it's ineffective. What do you make of that criticism?
Look, any of the technology solutions that have been mooted to date are utterly dependent on all of us in our uptake of them, whether that be using the app, well, first of all, downloading the app, putting it onto our phone, but then all using it to swipe into places as we go into it. So I think that all of us need to take some responsibility around how effective that app is, because it is down to each and every one of us. So you will have heard the Minister of Health repeatedly imploring people to make sure that not only do they have the app installed, but they are using it. Likewise, any of the other apps other technology solutions that might be out there also require human compliance. The ability to wear particular devices that might track your actions, or carrying cards will also require compliance as well. I think it comes down to the fact that we all need to take this seriously. We need to be able to do contact tracing for a purpose, and we've all got a part to play in that.
Are returnees told to download the app?
Well, returnees, of course, won't be going anywhere where they can swipe in and out. There's one place.
But they will, though. When they come in, when returnees arrive before they go back into the New Zealand community, are they told to download the app?
I don't have that detail, whether that's part of the welcome pack, but what I can assure you is, while returnees are in the facilities, there is nowhere to swipe in and out of.
In terms of that, and couple that with the fact that it's not if but when we get a second wave, and with all of the work that's being done at the borders and in the quarantine facilities, the rest of the New Zealand public out here living life largely as normal, do you think that we are prepared enough for a second wave?
Look, and that is the work that we're doing as a government, to make sure that we have a good plan in place should the worst happen. You would have heard the Prime Minister talk about this, and you would have heard the Minister of Health talk about it. We are, our job is to make sure that we're mitigating the risk at the border as much as we can, but collectively about government to make sure that we've got plans in place so that we can manage this collectively as a team of 5 million again, should the worst happen.
Kiwis are too comfortable?
Look, I think that we all need to remain vigilant, that we only need to turn on the news any night of the week or pick up a newspaper or read something online to see how lucky we are. The economic and social liberty that we enjoy in New Zealand is not really matched anywhere else in the world. That we have got here through our collective hard efforts. We worked hard to get here, and we need to collectively make sure we're protecting that and never take anything for granted.
Just quickly, why is it that not every staff member in a managed isolation facility has had a COVID test at this point in terms of for surveillance?
Well, one of the issues is that the health criteria is around symptomatic testing. So if there's not if someone wasn't displaying symptoms, the clinical guidelines would tell you that that person did not require a test. Over the last few weeks, Air Commodore Webb and I have been meeting with employees and their representatives, unions, around access for testing, because one of the things that we picked up very early on, visiting managed isolation and quarantine facilities, is actually the security and safety that some of the hotel workers in particular felt by the fact they had ready access to testing, whether or not they were symptomatic. So one of the things that we've been working with health about is to maybe expand out that criteria for access to testing so that asymptomatic people who are working in facilities can have access. It's something that we are keen for anyone working in those facilities have access to testing.
I thought it was already the case that workers inside border working at the border, which was I thought included the managed isolation facilities, were part of a surveillance testing regime that was started weeks ago.
Yeah, there is some surveillance testing, but surveillance testing wouldn't say that you'd have every person in a facility that would have that. What we're saying is beyond surveillance testing, within that we want to have access for anyone working inside those facilities, so they can have that security, their families they're returning home to can have that security, but also we as a community and as a nation can have that security as well.
So some have been tested under surveillance, but you're looking to broaden it, and you want it to be widespread, but without the symptomatic threshold.
Exactly. That anyone who feels like they'd like that extra layer of security and knowledge has access to that testing.
Have either of you had a test?
No, I haven't had a test. Have you had a test?
I have not had a test.
Yeah.
Do you think it's, are you excited by the prospect?
Of having a test? Certainly if I was symptomatic, I would go and have a test immediately. If I had any symptoms that are on the list that suggest you should go and have a test, I would go and have a test.
When was the last time you used the COVID Tracer app?
I used the COVID Tracer app yesterday.
Since signing into work?
Not to sign into work, I went to an event that had the QR code and I swiped into it. Thank you.
Thanks.